We'll call the K-12 Education Committee to order. Madam Clerk, please take the roll.
Representative Bolso. Here. Representative McKenzie. Here. Ritchie. Here. Slater. Stevens. Here. Warner.
Here.
Chairman White. Here. Chairman Hurt. Here. Chairman Haston.
Here.
Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Any personal orders before we begin? All right. Seeing none. Chairman Hurt, you were recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize. I was daydreaming down here. Members and guests, I'd like to welcome Samuel Hatcher. He's out in the back. Stand up for us, please, Samuel. Samuel is a senior at Crockett County High School up visiting today, and he's debating, kind of thinking about a career heading into political science. So y'all make him feel welcome, please.
Thank you for that. Any other personal orders? Yes, Representative Warner.
I see two of my constituents from the great county of Marshall in this state here. Could they please rise and give them a warm welcome here?
Welcome. Anybody else? Seeing none, brings us, we'll start right off the bat. Item number 1, House Bill 1183. Do I have a motion and a second? Second. Properly motion. You are recognized, Chairman White, on House Bill 1183, and I believe you do have an amendment.
Yes, sir. Let me get that for you. That amendment would be, is it 14448?
I believe that is correct. Do I have a motion and a second on the amendment? Second. Are you, without objection, members, this does rewrite the bill, so we will be voting to adopt amendment 01448. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no.
No.
Ayes have it. We are back on your bill as amended. You are recognized, Chairman White.
Thank you, Chairman and committee, and I appreciate the opportunity. Since we have our opening remarks are limited to 5 minutes, I would just like to make some opening overall remarks. Then we get into the details of the bill as we start into the questions. But so, members, what I'd like to start out by beginning is talking about why we're here today. The opportunity that we have. I'd like to start out by thanking the chairman of the committee of the education committees, Representative Moody, Representative Sapicki, Representative Raper, Representative Haston, Representative Slater, and Lafferty. We all worked that down since January, trying to find something that would come together and work for all of us, for public schools and for private schools. And so we have been working diligently on this. And I just wanted to start out by saying, we in Tennessee have a great opportunity to continue to do things. If you go back in 2017, Tennessee was recognized by NAEP, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, as the fastest improving state in the nation in education. For those of you familiar with this national organization, actually, about 4 years ago, I was appointed to that board, and we meet in Washington, D.C. 4 times a year. And that board has the function of comparing all 50 states on how they're doing. As a matter of fact, we're hosting the NAEP board in Nashville starting tomorrow. They wanted to come to Nashville. One reason is because they want to see what Tennessee is doing. And so we have been a state on the move in education and early childhood reading literacy. In January 2021, we jumped on the learning loss, and we've had the Drive to 55 now under Governor Haslam, the Tennessee Promise. We have been focused on education reform in this state for decades now, for at least a good decade and a half. And so Tennessee continues to lead in education, and this legislation before us is an opportunity on how we can rethink education in our state. I want to thank Governor Lee. I want to thank the Department of Education for continuing to put the emphasis on education in Tennessee. We have put approximately, I think, is over $2 billion in public education in Tennessee just in the last 4+ years. And we're continually looking for the best ways to educate all of our children in Tennessee in public, charter, and private. Our educational chairs, we took on the challenge to take the opportunity that the Governor Lee and the department have given us to truly come up with something that we feel like will revolutionize education in Tennessee, not just in not just revolutionize education in public schools, in private schools, and in charter schools, but to continue to move all our state forward. In this particular legislation, public schools have asked that we reduce the burden on teachers. We have been listening to our teachers and our superintendents and to our students all across the state. Just last Friday, I was in my home, not in my hometown, but in my home county of Collierville, and we sat and we watched a 5-year-old kindergarten class watch how they were going through the phonics. It was just amazing to see that when it works. So we have some great teachers. We have some great schools going on. What we have in this particular bill is that we are lowering the number of tests required on our public schools. We are turning more hours into the classroom. We continually hear, if I just had more hours to teach, we're turning more hours in the classroom. We have better intervention plans, better instruction supports to students that are behind. We are increasing the state share of health insurance for our districts from 45% to 60%, which is going to save our districts across the state approximately $200 million that they can now reinvest into their teacher salaries and into the schools in their districts. We're putting more funds into our sparse and our small districts. If you live in a small district or sparse district, transportation costs get out of hand because you may have to drive 15, 20 minutes to pick up the next child. So they have larger transportation costs. We have more funds put in there, $75 per child in the schools for building maintenance. So if you have a system of 10,000 children, that's another $750,000 that you can use. So all of this is what we're putting together to help our public schools. We have been listening and we're trying to address the needs of our public schools. All this is on top of the primary reason we're here is that we are continuing to offer our parents across the state of Tennessee choice when and where they need it. I continually advocate for parents. The number one responsibility for educating your child, or at least getting your child ready for school, belongs to the parent. And by giving parents a choice in their child's education all across their child's growing up is most important. So that is another aspect in this bill, giving choice to our parents. And so with that, Mr. Chairman, I will not use up my whole 5 minutes, but we can now go into details.
You were pretty close on it. Thank you for that explanation. Members, we already have some people on the list for questions. Representative McKenzie, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate you taking the time to lay it out. I'm hopeful to get that similar. But at first, I'd like to ask for a roll call vote on this.
Noted.
Thank you. To the sponsor, and there's a lot in this bill, and so Mr. I have a serious question. So my first question to you is, in 4850-801, church-related schools cannot be compelled by the state or local boards of education regarding textbooks, testing, or faculty curriculum of any manner. How can we command them or compel them to comply with our testing standards when by rule they can't?
Chairman Watt.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Representative McKenzie. Now you're not talking about homeschooling. You're talking about church-related schools in particular.
Yes.
Right. Well, in our private schools, we have categories 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and these are, of course, accredited either by our Department of Education, our State Board of Education, or a regionally accredited organization that is approved by our Department of Education, State Board of Education. And of course, church-related schools are one of those. Now, what we're doing with this bill, we're giving parents a choice to choose. And as we get into the details of this bill, we're going to open up things where our public schools also have the freedom and flexibility on some testing and things. So we're trying to make it more apples and apples. This is one of the things our public schools teachers have addressed us for years is that we are held to a standard that maybe a private school won't. So we will make sure there's equality as children move around. So that is a parent's choice. And so we're working to make our public schools give them more flexibility also.
Representative McKenzie?
Yeah, I hate to, I don't want to get argumentative, but in Category 5 schools, there is no accrediting agency. They just make a direct application to the Department of Education. That's the only thing that they do. And again, church-related schools are not compelled to do any type of testing. So again, I'll ask, for those type of schools, how are we going to meet the requirements that this bill lays out in terms of testing?
Chairman Watt?
Okay, ask that last part of the question real quick. I was reading.
Okay,
President
so
McKenzie?
I'm saying that because, and again, 4850-801, church-related schools cannot be regulated by state or local boards regarding textbooks, curriculum, testing. So how are we as a state going to compel them? Because in later documents, as they go through third and fourth, they're compelled to do testing. So how can we do that when it's against our laws?
Well, we do have an amendment relating to church-related schools defined in 4950-801, with which the student's parent is associated, registered, or participating as a parent-teacher for the purposes of the particular bill. And I'll let Representative Subcommittee, he's up here also to address some of these things. Mr. Chairman, can I let
Yes.
Mr. Speaker?
Yeah,
We're not, okay, I'm sorry.
yeah, we're not going into any kind of recess or anything.
So we got two members going to testify on this bill today?
Yes.
Okay.
Chairman Sapiki?
The question by Representative McKenzie is addressed in the untimely filed amendment. It does take the category 4 schools, church-related, like you spoke about, out of the equation of this bill to reflect the wishes of the homeschool community. When we talked to legal on this originally, it was. It's on. It's my voice today. I'm sorry. When we looked at this bill as originally drafted, we asked these questions to legal. And legal said that the language was a little bit vague in our bill as you're reading from right now. We saw this, we tried to make a correction, but we missed the amendment filing deadline. We have an amendment, it's untimely filed, and we normally don't put untimely filed amendments on in the sub, but our intention is to put this on in the fulls if this bill would move forward, to clean up that language about those schools that you're addressing.
Representative McKenzie, follow up, and then we did have a few people that had requested to testify that once we get through this part of the line of questioning, we will go out of session and allow some of our guests that had come to speak. But you're recognized.
So I guess as a question, I like to come back to me after this question, that if you don't mind, because this is a major step. As it relates to special ed, there's a may there that the private schools may be eligible to apply for this scholarship for private schools, but any student on an IEP will not be part of this program. Isn't that discriminating toward those students that have special needs? Shouldn't they all be eligible to get into this program?
Chairman Watt?
Thank you very much. Would you point out the section?
Okay. That's in section, it's on page, looks like 4, section 4 of 49-63504, scholarship amounts and allowable uses. It says, although a student participating in the program does not retain the right to receive special education, so he loses the right to receive, and related services through an IEP, individualized educational program, he may be eligible under the Special Ed Act to receive equitable services. May.
Sorry, Bob.
And so as I read that, that to me reads that he or she is not eligible to retain rights under an IEP, but they may be eligible to be considered special ed in these schools. So again, I'll ask, doesn't that go contrary or counter to what we're trying to do here, educate all of our children? And isn't this at least a bit wrong? I guess I'll use that word.
Chairman speaking.
Representative McKenzie, the answer is no. It's already in law right now. The reason why that group of students, the reason why that group of students are excluded is because they already are addressed elsewhere in code, that they are allowed a bigger benefit. You already have parents that are allowed to take students with disabilities who believe that their educational needs are not being met by the public schools. They can go seek education elsewhere, and that those funding dollars follow them. So in your point there, if you included them in this bill, you would actually be hamstringing those students.
All right, one more question on this, and then
Okay.
we'll go out of session for a few guests.
Okay, but again, I'll say it's clear here. It said they do not retain the right to receive an IEP. So if they're on an IEP, they lose the right to keep that IEP going into this program. So I'll just ask you to respond to that, and absolutely, let's bring our guest up.
Chairman Watt?
Yes, since it is in law, I don't know if legal would like to address this at this point or not, but
Well, I will say this, we also have the department down, so after we get through some of our guests, it might be a really good question to ask the Department of Education to come up and address that particular question that Representative McKenzie has. Chairman Watt?
yes, and being that we're on this discussion, I do want to point out in this particular legislation that any of our category 1 through 5 schools that would want to participate, it has to be one that is one of these categories, and then they also have to be operating in Tennessee for at least 3 years. We were adamant in this drafting this bill that there would not be pop-up schools as a result of this. You have to be a registered category school, and you had to be in operation in Tennessee at least 3 years.
All right, Representative Warner?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just, I guess, a point of order or just for clarification, I've had a constituent text me since we've been in committee here, and we have a new member sitting on this committee. Could you explain why this member is sitting on this committee, please?
Thank you. The speaker or the speaker pro tem is allowed to sit in on a committee to vote.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
President McKenzie?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The way I understand it, that the speaker gets a seat on all these committees, not the speaker and the speaker pro tem.
Or his designee.
I
I
like
believe it
that's
is the
legal.
speaker or the speaker designee is what we're being told. Without objection, we'll be going out of session to hear some witnesses that were down to speak. So without objection, we will be going out of session. And first on the list, we had Drew Sutton. If Drew Sutton is here, he can come on up and just, for the record, state your name and who you represent, and you'll have 2 minutes for remarks, and then we'll open it up for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee for the opportunity to come before you today, and for previous invitations to weigh in on concepts that are present in the legislation today. I was hoping for 3 minutes, so I'll try to talk fast, and if there are questions at the end, please feel free to ask. My name is Drew Sutton with the Tennessee Education Association. For nearly 160 years, the Tennessee Education Association has been the state's largest professional organization advocating for the interests of Tennessee's public schools, their students, and educators. With that in mind, I'm here today on behalf of TEA's members to speak in opposition to the proposed universal voucher bill. This proposal creates two parallel systems of education in Tennessee that are ultimately funded through the same funding source. Similar proposals in other states have already been met with disastrous consequences due to the introduction of new costs in the form of extending subsidies to students and families who are already enrolled in public schools, or never enrolled in public schools. I apologize. As an example, Arizona last year created an overrun of nearly 1,300% in their projected costs. In the state of Florida, that overrun was over $2 billion over projected costs, and several other states with similar programs face escalating costs that threaten their ability to support their public schools, where the vast majority of students still receive their education. This represents a major concern that over time the voucher program will operate as it has in other states and begin to consume ever larger portions of state education investments, which in turn could lead local governments the choice of either cutting services and potentially closing neighborhood schools or raising local revenue to reconcile the difference. We believe this bill sets Tennessee on a similar path with its stated intent to fund every eligible student who applies. Presumably, this would include the more than 100,000 students currently attending a private school in the state, which would carry an associated cost of over $700 million a year. There are also concerns about the students who do leave to accept the voucher. The limited data that we have on the current ESA program in Tennessee demonstrates that the children who took that voucher are recording lower achievement scores on state tests than their public school peers. What's more research from large-scale studies in Ohio, Louisiana, and Indiana concluded that voucher students performed much worse compared to their closely matched public school peers. Research also shows that private schools accepting vouchers are often already financially distressed or are new and relatively unproven, which can, in many cases, leave those students displaced should those schools ultimately close. This also speaks to the importance of accountability. As was previously stated, any proposal we believe must be subject to the same state mandated tests that are required of public schools in order to have a true apples to apples comparison.
About 10 seconds.
All right. Public schools, in closing, are the foundation of every community. Tennesseans love their neighborhood public schools, and we believe this proposal endangers those schools and the communities that they serve. But with that, thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer any questions the committee may have.
Thank you, Mr. Sutton. Members, any questions? Representative McKenzie?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And as the sponsor laid out in his opening conversation, he talked about how the teachers are for these things because of the increases to education or to the health insurance and as well as reduction on their depending on their tier level, their evaluations and things like that. And I think two questions. How many teachers do you represent, and have you gotten that same feedback back from your group that you're representing in terms of support of this bill because of these incentives?
Mr. Sutton?
Thank you for the question, Representative. The Tennessee Education Association represents tens of thousands of educators and support professionals throughout the state. I would characterize what I've heard from educators as this. There are many concepts in this bill that TEA has advocated for a number of years, but I've yet to talk to a single educator that believes that this is the right approach to marry this up with a concept that we believe would be incredibly damaging to public schools. So in short, I don't believe that the concepts that are present in this legislation outweigh the harm that we see this type of universal voucher doing to the stability of public schools.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right. Thank you. I'm sorry. Representative Ritchie?
Thank you, Chairman, and thanks for being here. The sponsor laid out whenever he was introducing the bill, talking about parental involvement, parental engagement. You referenced as far as for the ESA program, which this is not a touching or addressing, but you said since its inception, underperforming, whatever, not quoting, I don't know the exact number. I would counter that and saying that the information that you're seeing there is based on a subsector inside of specific counties, inside of specific schools, inside of specific families. And if the number one contributor that you end up seeing when it comes to public education, or when it comes to education across the board, whether it's homeschool, private school, public education, is parental involvement and parental engagement, there's data that also shows that in other states, once we get up to year 4 and year 5 is when we start seeing those particular students outperforming those particular subsects. And I don't know if they've taken any consideration for schools that are not in the bottom 5% in the state and testing those students in a different testing environment. So although that you stated that number, and I would argue that it's not, it's one of those half truths. There might be a little bit of validity there but lean it out like that's the gospel is misleading to a lot of people when we end up looking at the particular subsectors of where it's at, and we don't have anything on the opposite end of the spectrum. If we looked at some of the schools that are in my district, Blount County, Maryville, Alcoa, we look at Williamson County, other schools across the state that don't fall into that parameter to even be eligible for that. I would argue that those students would have a lot higher achievement potential if they're in that fostered environment. So I just want to put more of a clarifying statement out there.
Mr. Sutton, we had one other question if you didn't have a follow-up to that.
If
Go
I
ahead.
may, and thank you for your comments, Representative. I think I have two thoughts on that, if I might, and I'll be brief, but I think that you're absolutely right. The point that you raised that there's very limited data and that it is only coming from a handful of counties. Now, I do think that it's worth noting that these aren't all the students taking the current ESA are not attending bottom 5% schools. The way the eligibility is set up currently is any district that has a bottom 5% school. So these students could be coming from some of the top performing schools in Shelby, Hamilton, or Davidson County. So it may not all necessarily be the case that they are in fact attending those lower performing schools. But in regards to what you had mentioned about having more data, I think that as I understand, the original intent of the bill in 2019 was for it to serve as a pilot to provide us with rich data so that we can measure the efficacy of the concept. We only have 1 year of data right now. So to your point, I don't know that anyone would necessarily submit that we have that rich amount of data to evaluate the efficacy of the program. But I'd be happy to discuss that further with you regarding studies that have looked at large scale and large scope voucher programs in other states. And I would submit that according to a consensus of most of the research with which I'm familiar, the larger the program, the more negative the results are. And again, I'm happy to share that with you or any other members of the committee that would like to review that literature.
Representative Warner? All right. All right. Any other questions? All right. Thank you, Mr. Sutton. We had a couple other people on the list.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee.
Is Tiffany Boyd here? Tiffany Boyd, you can come on up and just make sure that the red light is on and state your name for the record and who you represent or where you're from. And you'll have 2 minutes and then we'll open it up for any questions. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. Yes.
No.
Is that better? Okay. My name is Tiffany Boyd, and I'm here today representing Free Your Children in the homeschool community at large. I want to start by saying that we already have school choice in Tennessee. We have the choice to homeschool our children. We have the choice to send them to public school. We have the choice to send them to private school. In the state of Tennessee, the majority of homeschoolers are registered under Category 4 schools, which makes them fall into that private school category. As homeschoolers, we adamantly oppose this bill. At a recent event, a representative promised the public 7 days to review the House language. That did not happen. A game of cat and mouse in an attempt to prevent public comment has failed. Homeschoolers were told they would be written out of the bill. They were not. The public was told the bill would not come with strings. It does. We know and understand that what the government funds it runs. We know and understand school choice initiatives lead to increased government overreach as witnessed in other states. We know that the state of Tennessee is not adequately educating public school students. Since you have not been successful educating our state's public school students, why then would taxpayers want the state controlling private education? There is no choice when all choices are government controlled. School choice does not create competition. There is no competition when all forms of education are government controlled. School choice expands big government by creating public-private partnerships. Public-private partnerships create a system that is unaccountable to the taxpayer. Public-private partnerships destroy transparency. School choice vouchers are the root of public-private partnerships and are designed to medicalize our schools, effectively destroying our constitutional rights. School choice destroys true private education, our parental rights and educational rights, and our constitutional rights. Research proves that homeschool students statistically outperform public schools. We are not broken. We do not want government money. We want the government out of our homes. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you. You're right on the 2-minute mark too. Very well
Thank you.
rehearsed on that. Representative McKenzie?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for that testimony. So,
Yes.
so you are, just to be clear, in that category 4
Correct.
category. So I'll quote something. So here it says, there's a long number, but church-related schools in this category
Mhm.
may operate an umbrella program that allows parents or legal guardians to participate as parent teacher to homeschool their
Correct.
children.
Yes.
So what you're saying, and I'd
Mhm.
like you if you to maybe elaborate a little more
Yes.
in terms of this provision can be
Yes.
basically used to get the voucher, is what you're saying.
That's what it reads as of right now. Category 4 schools are listed
Thank you.
in that category.
Chairman White, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman Committee. And we can let legal weigh into this. Homeschoolers are totally written out of this bill. We have an amendment here, and we have talked about this. We can let legal show it to you. And there's nothing in this bill that puts any governance over any private school.
I got a point of order on that.
Oh.
He's talking about things that we don't even
Representative McKenzie,
have.
please wait till you're recognized. Thank you.
Let me finish.
I apologize.
Let me finish.
Point of order.
All right, point of order, Representative McKenzie.
Thank you. Now, again, I apologize, Mr. Chair. The sponsor is introducing information that we don't even have before us. He has amendments that he said are untimely filed. I don't have any of this information before me. So how can we discuss things that we don't have before?
Representative McKenzie, I believe that is already in the bill. We will go to legal and let them address that.
Casey Washburn, Office of Legal Services. Representative McKenzie, to your question, the definition of eligible student in Amendment 14448 in 2C says an eligible student means a resident of this state who is not enrolled in a homeschool pursuant to 49.6.30.50. 49.6.30.50 in subdivision A2 references homeschools that teach kindergarten, kindergarten through grade 12, where the parents are associated with and where students are enrolled with the church-related school that are supervised by the church-related school's achievement tests and that are exempt from the requirements of that section that would apply to a traditional homeschooled student. So that section that's referenced in the bill would include both traditional homeschool students and students that are participating through a church-related school, but that are still considered homeschool students.
So that is the good news for you and being our guest, that homeschool are out of the.
Well, the bill references, if I may ask, the bill references specifically Category 4 schools as an option to utilize these vouchers. So is that going to be delineated in this apparent amendment that's supposed to be coming that we haven't seen yet? Is it going to be made clear?
This amendment, I think that that's being referenced, just clarifies the language that she just read to make sure, since it's referencing different parts of code, a lot of times it's not seen in the language of the bill because it's referencing other parts of code. So that language only clarifies what you just heard from that other part of code.
And here's our biggest concern with that is wording is very easily amended. So we have concerns that in the future, this could definitely lead to more government overreach, as has happened in other states.
All right, we have a question for legal from Representative Ritchie was on the list first. Ritchie.
Thank you. Legal, under that same section, but if we drop down to number 4 and go into 4B, a church-related school or private school, as those terms are defined in 49.6.3001 C3A, that is the definition of a private school. And when we end up looking at who is eligible for the scholarships, it's for private school. And in that definition right there, when you look at 49.6.301 C3A, it's my understanding and interpretation from reading that's talking about church-related schools, specifically verbatim in there. I don't know if you could read that particular section out so that the members can hear that.
Thank you, Representative Ritchie. Casey Washburn, Office of Legal Services again. You're correct that the definition of private school does include a church-related school and a private school as defined in code, and includes categories 1 through 5. That
Yes.
is included in the legislation
Yes.
for who is considered a private school at which the scholarship can be used.
And
But in-
legally homeschool.
But
Okay.
but in order to qualify for a scholarship, a student has to be an eligible student. So if that student's not eligible because they're enrolled in a homeschool, they would not be eligible for a scholarship to use at a private school. Does that clarify your question?
Thank you. Representative Warner, did you have a question?
Yes, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, and this is to legal, and you're gonna have to help me here, legal, and bear with me. So we have these different categories in the homeschool, and I've learned a lot here the last few days on the homeschooling, the different categories and whatnot. My question to you, if a category, say 4 or 5, or the ones that are not being taught at home by the parent, and say if one of the other categories take money from this program, does all of those categories then fall under it, or are they all still going to remain separate? If you understand my question there, I might not have done the best job of phrasing it.
I'll try, and you let me know if I'm not understanding you correctly. I think there's overlap in kind of how they're being considered for purposes of the legislation. If a student or the student's parent if the student's eligible and the student or the student's parent applies for a scholarship and they receive a scholarship, they have to use those scholarships and enroll in a private school. And that's the definition of private school, which is categories 1 through 5. So it doesn't necessarily dictate the practices of the school so much as which schools a student must enroll in if they receive a scholarship.
So let me try to rephrase that one time and see if I can get some better clarification. And you've done a fantastic job there. Let's say I am homeschooling my child, and then there's a group down the road, a group of homeschoolers that have, say, 4 or 5 children from 4 or 5 different families, and they've hired a retired school teacher. And that group chooses to take the state-funded money or the scholarship program. And I'm the single parent down here, or the family with the single child, homeschooling my child at home. Do I fall under any of those guidelines as the group that has the 5 that has the teacher?
The requirements of the program would only apply to those students that are participating in the scholarship program. So only those students that are eligible students and that apply for the scholarship would be required to comply with the requirements of the program.
One quick follow-up and I'll be done. So if you don't take this money, you don't fall under this program at all, correct?
It's my understanding that only the family that receives the scholarship has to comply with the requirements of the program. The private school is the school that's as defined in the legislation that they have to enroll in as a requirement to participate and receive those funds.
Because I've not had one single, and this may be to the bill, but I've not had one single homeschooler call me and tell me to support this bill. And I'm just trying to get clarification on that, because I think there's some confusion out there. And this really is not you. I'll wait and address the chairman on this.
All right. Thank you. Ms. Boyd, thank you for the
Thank you.
conversation you have sparked.
Thank you.
And thank you for the questions. We do have one more person on the list. Amy Briggs. Please come on up and make sure that you state your name and who you represent or where you're from, and then you'll have 2 minutes, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you for letting me speak. Hello, my name is Amy Briggs, and I began my teaching career in 2001. Currently, I teach 4th and 5th grades ELA and science in Clay County schools. I oppose HB 2468, HB 1183 regarding school choice. School choice is a myth. It removes choice and freedom from parents or for parents. As a teacher, I am bombarded daily with garbage curriculum which comes with government strings attached. My teacher's guides, now with scripted language, tell me what I'm supposed to say, almost word for word, as I teach required content. We do not need more government control, such as is camouflaged in this bill about choice. We don't need more control dictating not only curriculum and standards, but now who can do what. Currently, I teach content that other teachers at my school refuse to teach because instruction we are to give students is so poorly written and structured that it does not address actual student need. All students need proficiency in reading, writing, and math, but it must be independent and free of government funding and formulation. It feels like everything is government funded. Current curriculum is a hodgepodge using roundabout and inefficient strategies to teach in an impractical and ineffective manner. We cannot afford to be vague with the language with respect to our children's future. Why will we approve legislation that takes even more control of a broader audience of students? Not just, of course, this affects not just public, but private charter homeschool students as well. Please kill this bill. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Members, any questions for our guest? All right. Seeing none, thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you.
Without objection, we will go back into session. We are back in session. Chairman Watt, you were recognized.
Thank you, and I would like to get to the details of the bill whenever the committee is ready. Let me end on this to correct any misunderstanding. Homeschoolers are not written in this bill. We got a letter from them saying, please do not include us. We wrote them out as legal has told you, and there's nothing in this bill that has any government overreach or government into the private schools. If a parent chooses to have that option, that is all that this does. The bulk of the bill is what we're trying to do for our public schools, because 90% of our children do go to public schools, and we are trying to build up what the our public schools are doing. So, Mr. Chairman, when you're ready for that, we'll go.
Representative Warner, you were recognized for your question from earlier.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, just getting back to the confusion and you know, and I want to call him out. Representative Sapicki is a great friend of mine, one I respect down here dearly.
No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
All right, you caught me off guard there. And I thank the world of Representative Sapicki. But we spoke at an event 2 weeks ago, and Representative Sapicki promised those folks that they would get a week to vet this bill. This bill was dropped in our lap last night at 5 o'clock. We have not had the proper time to vet this bill, to go through it. There's a lot of unanswered questions. And my question is, can we roll the bill a week until we can get some clarification of what's going on?
Well, that is a motion. It will take a second. All right. Members, we'll be on a roll call vote to whether or not we will be rolling this bill 1 week. And Madam Clerk, please take the vote.
Representative Balso? No. Votes no. Representative McKenzie?
Aye.
Votes aye. Representative Ritchie?
Aye.
Votes aye. Representative Slater?
No.
Votes no. Representative Stevens?
No.
Votes no. Representative Warner?
Yes.
Votes yes. Chairman Hart?
Aye.
Votes aye. Chairman White?
No.
Votes no. Chairman Haston?
No.
Votes no. Speaker Marsh?
No.
Votes no. Chairman, you have 6 noes and 4 ayes.
All right. The motion fails. Chairman Sapicki, your name was called.
Thank you for the opening. I appreciate it. Yes, that is true, members. I spoke at an event about 2 weeks ago. And members, as chairman, we know how hard we were diligently working on trying to get this to fruition. Members, we know, Chairman, we know that this bill up until 10 o'clock yesterday was going through a rewrite at the last moment, trying to clarify some issues that our constituents, that our people sitting over here made issues and complaints to me about, and we were trying to rewrite this in a timely manner. The clarification that Mr. McKenzie was referencing about homeschoolers, we had the ability to do that, but we ran out of time, sir. There is no intention in this bill at all that homeschoolers will be eligible to participate in this program, so that we can maintain, from a letter from the Tennessee Home Education Association, to comply with their wishes. Mr. Chairman, we are here about educating students. I hope we can focus on the education of our students instead of the politics of the matter that's in the room right now. Let's focus on educating our students. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Warner.
And I appreciate Mr. or Representative Sapicki's comments. And again, my only point is, let's have some transparency here. Let's let people look at this bill. Let's break it down. We've had less than 24 hours. We're in committee and we still don't have all the questions. It's easy for them to sit up here and ask and answer the questions and give us details, but they've had the bill. We haven't had the bill.
I understand your concerns. We've taken a vote of the committee. That's all I can do as chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Resident Ritchie.
Thank you, Chairman. And I just want to kind of echo some of those concerns, looking at the language of the overall, the bill, and I'm going to clarify it as two separate things. We've got the bill, and then we have the language that's written on this paper. I had heard about the bill all the way back in October, whenever the governor's office came in and sat down. I heard this is what we're looking at doing. This is what we're looking at having in here. And very little of what I had heard is actually even in this bill. And it must be nice that we have 3 of the members that sit on this committee that got to actually sit down and figure out what's in here. And because it's such a contentious bill moving forward, we even invited an additional member to come and sit down to make sure that we have the votes to ram it through when there's overwhelming support. And I'm not saying I'm against the bill. I like the concept. I'm for school choice. I am for parents being able to have that choice. There's a lot of elements in here that I like. I've heard from my superintendent, and specifically verbatim, he said, there's not much in the enticements that were added that really interest me or benefit my school district. I've heard that from all of my school district. So whenever the sponsor stood up here and said that he's spoken to all these school districts, nobody's coordinated or spoke with anybody from my district. And to only give me 24 hours when principle, I'm in favor of this. But there's some bad language on this bill that needs to be cleaned up and polished. And I just mentioned it earlier. Hey, let's have conversation. Let's have a discussion on this. And then let's bring that back, because it is the practice in this committee, and I haven't been here that long, but it is the practice that we move stuff through in the proper posture. And now we're saying, hey, we've got another amendment because we couldn't get that in time because you already knew what was in here. I found out what was in here a little bit earlier at 5 o'clock, like my colleague sitting next to me mentioned, but I didn't have any time to submit one amendment because the deadline was at 10, and I think this was dropped at 9:59 and 59 seconds. So that's my concern. I just want to make sure that's on the record. I like the concept of the bill. I like what we're trying to do, but we don't have to be in a race to fall on our face, especially when there's things happening in the other chamber. We don't have to worry about what's going on over there, but we need to get the language right, because that's what we're voting on. We're not voting on a bill. We're voting on the language inside of here. But to go back on one of my primary concerns, to get to the question, one of the things that had been shared over and over and over when we end up speaking to, I've met with the governor's team 5 times, and I was shared, okay, there's going to be 2 buckets. We're going to have 2 10,000 buckets of this 20,000 scholarships that are going to be available. And there was conversation that went from 200% of the household poverty level national, and then it went to 300, and then we hear the 400. And then I'm excited. I'm like, all right, we got to 400. Well, now we went from having the 1 bucket of being at 300% to where it's at 400, and the rest of it being universal, to now there's all of a sudden 2 additional buckets. And that's where a lot of my draw comes in, because when we're looking at the priority list, number 1 are the individuals that are eligible under the ESA requirements currently or fall under the disability component that's there. Then number 2 is where we get to the 400%, which is what we've been told for the last 3 months. Then there's the 500. Then we get to the universal. Nobody had a conversation with me. All the communications that I've shared, I've held 4 listening tours. I wasn't having closed meetings, writing bills. I was actually going out and chatting with the folks in my district to see what concerns and stuff so that I could come back and let the committee know what was going on. What was the overall logic or reason on putting those 2 elements in there when not one time until we seen this bill, it had been mentioned to me from the governor's team or anybody else from Department of Education, or nobody had mentioned that there's going to be the.
Chairman Watt.
Let me address where we are. I mean, we've used the last 30 minutes debating that we don't know the bill. I'm here to midnight, And if y'all can stay to midnight, you know how we operate around here. We get these bills that we're working on. Every bill is like this. We're working on it and working on it and working on it. Each committee, criminal, education, transportation, they're all working on their bills. That's our process up here. And so now this bill will be going through committee for the next 7 weeks. And that's why we're going to get started. We finally get to a point where we have something that we can present to the committee. That's what we're trying to do right now. You talk about you want to roll it for a week. We're trying to spend this time to go over the details of the bill. That's what we're here for. We're not going anywhere, and we'll be here as long as you want to. And Mr. Chairman, we can get to the very questions they're having. We can get to right now.
I believe there was a question about how the percentages were arrived at the family rates. If you had any answer to that, I believe you did have a question on that. So go ahead.
That's because we listen to all sides as we've gone through this. We're trying to have a bill. Now, it may change as we go through this next 7-week process, but when you listen to all the sides that say, well, we think it should be this and or that. And so we've got something here. This is a start. Say it could be a beginning start. It may change as we go through the committee system, but we have something to present to you at this point. There has to be a starting point, and that's where we are.
Representative Bolso?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is for the sponsor. We just heard some testimony, Chairman, that criticized the proposal in a number of respects. And I'd simply like you to respond to each one of these arguments to make sure that I understand exactly what's the proposal that's before us. The first criticism that we heard from Mr. Sutton had to do with economics, that in Arizona, their program was 1,300% over budget. In Florida, it was $2 billion over budget. The fiscal note that we've got here on this bill, as I read it, it's approximately $400 million. And my first question simply is, are you able to tell us your level of confidence that that $400 million fiscal note is an accurate cost to the state of Tennessee for this proposal?
Yeah, I'll start, then I'll let Representative Sabicki. Yes, that's the number we've been working on. Because we passed a new $1 billion into public education a couple years ago, $250 million is already in the budget, and we have an agreement that we're working through and the other part is the health care, that we want to pump it up from 45 to 60% to give our districts about $200 million that we back in their district. So we have those numbers as where we feel confident right now.
Chairman Spiggy?
To go into a little bit more depth and detail of your question, Representative Bolso, we have looked at and investigated the shortcomings of other states of how they let this get out of control and potentially do damage to the state's budget. We put guardrails in place in this, looking at states like Arizona that have made, in my opinion, a colossal mistake that has just about put the Arizona budget in a perilous position. We've put caps on the growth of this to make sure that if it grows sensibly. It grows in a way that the General Assembly can afford it as it moves forward. It's driven by usage. One of the problems that we have in Tennessee right now, and we all notice in our private schools, is capacity. Do we have the capacity for our children to get out of a bad public school and get into a good, high-performing private school? The income levels that was referenced by my colleague, the 400%, which is $120,000 of poverty for a family of four. The 500% is another category of $150,000. Trying to maintain the balance of what is our goal. Our goal is to get kids in bad public school situations into a better opportunity, not be like Arizona, where we're just going to dump $1 billion into our private schools just because we can. There are sufficient guardrails in here that we've worked with other states to make sure that that thing does not happen in Tennessee.
Representative Bolso?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I might follow up, do we have an idea as to how many students it's anticipated will be in the program that makes up that $400 million fiscal cost?
Chairman Sapiki?
So the $400 million fiscal cost is not all the school choice portion. Roughly about $140 million of that is the school choice portion, in alignment with what the Governor Lee has proposed as an investment. The guardrails are finance and this General Assembly on how we want it to expand, and can we afford it? The remaining part of this money that's in the fiscal note are for the immensely strategic things that we've done for public education to transform them and give them the ability to compete educationally on a level playing field with, in quotations, the private schools. And I hope that answered your question about the fiscal note.
Representative Bolso?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, it does. And if it's 140 million, my rough math is that if we have $7,000 per student, that's about 20,000 students.
Yes, sir.
And the balance of the cost is for the public school improvements. Is that correct?
Chairman speaking.
That is correct.
All right.
Representative Bolso?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next criticism had to do with homeschooling. As I understand, Chairman White's already pointed out, that's off the table now. Then Ms. Briggs raised some concerns about the extent to which teachers are being programmed and scripted by our existing laws, and that apparently has an adverse effect on educating children in the public schools. Could you address that?
Chairman White?
I will start out, and then, yes, and that is one of the things that's why we're making this bill about our public schools. We listen to our public school teachers. We are a high-performing state in accountability, and we put a lot of good guardrails over the years. We hear a lot of issues from our teachers that says, you know, you put so many demands on me as far as I'm teaching to the test that I don't have time to just really teach. And so that's part of this bill. We're pulling back, giving some more flexibility, less teaching time. And for example, currently in the bill, in our 3rd through 8th grade, our end of course tests, we'll still keep those, but we'll go back from the state requirements to the federal requirement, which will save hundreds of hours in the classroom. And we're also looking at doing the same in the high school also. And we're actually working on some thoughts now on rethinking high school. What does it mean? Because higher education is changing so fast, and our young people in our 9th through 12th need to be ready to move right in to higher education. So there's a lot of things that this lines up with.
Mr. Chairman.
Chairman Sapigi?
To go further in detail on your question, which is very poignant, the individual that's sat next to me and teachers that I've talked to across the state, their major complaint is no time. So we have gotten everything down to a script in education that you have to teach this standard today, this standard tomorrow, get ready to test, reevaluate, start the next standards, prepare for a test. Our middle schoolers right now take on average of 14 to 15 tests a year. It's utterly ridiculous, the over testing that we do, which prevents a teacher from looking at the standards, pulling back and figuring out, okay, this is my class. I'm teaching my class. They're struggling with this standard. I can take the time to spend it with my students and get them educated. One of the things that we're talking about doing is rolling back our testing guidelines to the federal guidelines on testing, which will eliminate, I believe it's 14 to 15 end of course tests for our students right now in grades 3 through 12. Giving more time back to those teachers, less tests, response to intervention right now. That is what we do for students that need extra help. Right now, there's a double overlay there between high dosage, low ratio tutoring, that now they have to do both to meet the guidelines of the state. We're contemplating in this bill to let those be interchangeable, which therefore creates more time. Ladies and gentlemen, time is the most valuable asset for our teachers. And if we can put more time into the classroom and still be able to gather the data we need to make sure our students are progressing, we all win.
I will just add to that before we move on. I met with close to 3 dozen EOC teachers, TCAP teachers, administrators, principals, counselors, and some of the numbers that we came back from on this was currently our Tennessee required testing comes to around 67 hours. We could meet our federal requirements by just testing 46 hours. So that alone, of course, is saving 20 hours. But if you take into account the amount of time that goes into prep for the EOC courses, which includes the test construction administration, Master Connect benchmarks, practice test construction. It comes to about 305 total hours, K through 12, or 3 through 12 that we have that we could free up in instruction time. So we could add 305 hours of instruction time to our classrooms. That's 167 total instruction hours that could be freed up 3rd through 8th. That's 138 total instruction hours freed up 9 through 12th. That's 222 class periods 3rd through 8th, and that's 110 high school block class schedules 9 through 12th. And I know this is anecdotal. I don't like to usually give a lot of examples like that, but I had one biology teacher that came to me and said that she could add 2 to 3 additional hands-on science lab courses if she had more instruction time added in, if it wasn't for some of the end of course testing that we're putting there. So that's, there's a lot of talk about not reaching out and not talking to enough people, but that came directly from the classroom. I just want to make sure that the committee heard that. Representative Bolso, did you have a follow-up?
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it.
Representative McKenzie?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And as we discussed earlier, this, I agree with my representative from Blount County, and that this has been on our radar. But even as late as the governor's State of the State address, it was 141 million. Now this is swollen in the last 24 hours for me to $424 million. That's significant. I understand you all have been digging, and I applaud you all's work. But think about it from the receivership. I need to vet this. Now's the time. You say you can stay up to midnight. It'd been nice to stay up to midnight 2 or 3 nights ago to bring us along iterative. That's not where we are. We got this amendment dropped on us. So that's where we are. So my concerns are significant. My concerns are significant in that you say that costs won't spiral and that we'll be able to control it. But once you get in, there's a guarantee that you'll stay in. And then if we hit that 90% of the 20,000 households, then it grows by 10%. You get another 20%. And then the next year, if you hit that 90%, it grows another 20%. So the costs are growing and growing and growing in perpetuity. There's no guardrail. There's no end to that. So I don't know if this is just to transfer all the public schools into private schools, but that theoretically could happen. And again, I would like to know, and I would a specific question to what you said earlier. I don't know which sponsor said it, but I want to know what high-performing private school can educate a poor-performing student or student from a poor-performing school at $7,000.
Chairman Watt, you're recognized.
So you're asking a question. First of all, it's a parent's choice. That's the bottom line if that happens. I am from a city, Memphis. We have a large population of inner city. I visit private schools every day. There's tuitions about $7,000 to $8,000, and they are performing for the children of that community. I went to a parents' night the other night in a particular school. They've got 70 students. They keep it small because it's a highly challenged district. There's a lot of crime in that area, and the families in the poverty. 52 of those students already are on the current ESA, being that it's in Shelby County. They said, I don't know where I would have my child right now if it wasn't for this school. So to take situations and say, you just don't know when it is working for those who need it. That is the issue.
Representative McKenzie, and then we have 2 or 3 others on the list.
Okay, again, 24 hours, and my voice is being limited here. This is very, very frustrating.
Your voice is not being limited. I'm trying to not limit other people's voices, and you can get back on the list. So ask your question, and then we can come back to you.
As it relates to that, in Knox County, did a survey of private schools. The cheapest one was $6,800, and that did not include any of the food costs, transportation costs, uniform costs, or anything like that. So we don't have a school like that. You all probably do because this voucher thing has been in the works, but I get that. But I'll say to you on that, and I'll ask you to respond. You talk about parental happiness, but we also be talking about student outcomes. Those student outcomes were worse on average. I don't know what about those 30 kids, so I don't have that data. But on average, those students that took the vouchers performed worse than those poor performing inner city schools that we're vilifying right now. So again, I'll ask you, yes, we have. So I will ask you, what anecdotal evidence that we have, and we have some data, although fresh, that this is going to work?
Chairman Watt?
Thank you. And I'll let Chairman Sapiki weigh in also. The question you are asking, evidence, it's evidence if a parent is looking for a choice for their child. If this bill has helped one child, that's what it's about. You're asking for anecdotal evidence. You're trying, and we're not vilifying anybody. Public schools, the reason we put so much in here for public schools is because we want to help build them up. But the other part of the program is if a parent wants that choice for that one child. I've talked to a lot of public schools. I've talked to private schools. And they all say we can't be everything to every child. So therefore, to having opportunities for that child to do something else is what we're trying to get at. Mr. Chairman, may I recognize Representative Sapiki?
Chairman Sapiki, you're recognized.
Thank you. The anecdotal evidence that you're looking for is in the numbers when you go and you visit private schools and you talk to the teachers there, which I have, about students that are coming from these failing public schools, that the students are so far behind. And Representative in Knox County, you know this as well as I do, one of our number one complaints about teachers in the public school system is that we continue to evaluate such as a sixth grade teacher on their performance with their students. But their number one complaint is, why are you holding me accountable for my sixth grade students when 3/4 of the class is showing up reading on a third grade level? One would expect logically that if a student would go from one of those schools that are multiple grade levels behind and take advantage of this scholarship and go to a private school, that academic rigor would be new to them, that it might set them back a little bit until they could get up to speed in that new rigor and environment. And I think you're going to see evidence here, and that's what we're really looking forward to, is the second year of the voucher program, as those students start to get going and start to get online with that new rigor and that new environment, that we're going to start to see their educational outcomes take off. It almost seems like we're rooting against the kids. And so I hope that we're not doing that. I hope we're trying to find the best outcome for these kids, no matter where it is, knowing that we spend $9 billion a year on public education that is going nowhere. It's still going to be here.
Representative Warner and Representative Kinsey, we can get you back on the list if you'd like to get back on there. Mr. Representative Warner, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just for the record, I don't think anyone in here is against school choice or parent choice or whatnot. What I'm against is I'm against the government paying for it. Our government is to provide public schools. They've done that. Now, if we have a problem with our public schools, in which I think we do in Tennessee, it's time that we start holding some of these folks accountable, maybe. Okay. One problem I've got is, we go to California to hire a commissioner, and we don't hire someone from Tennessee that instills Tennessee values upon our children. That's just a personal problem that I have. I've got a couple statements I'm going to read here, then I'm going to quote someone, then I'm going to ask you a question. So bear with me here, please. And either one of you may take the question or the statement or whatnot. Bear with me. Private schools taking taxpayer money must be held accountable through strict regulations. No exemptions. A public school, this is a quote, a public school would become any school that receives students who brought with them public monies. Do either one of you know who quoted that? Did you understand the quote? Should I read it again?
Go ahead.
A public school would become any school that receives students who brought with them public monies. Former Governor Lamar Alexander, former U.S. Senator Lamar Alexander, and former Secretary of Education Lamar Alexander. Let me go on. We must remind ourselves of the purpose of the public education under Tennessee Constitution. And I quote here, the state of Tennessee recognizes the inherent value of education and encourages its support. The General Assembly shall provide for the maintenance, support, and eligibility standards of a system of free public schools. Tennessee is responsible for ensuring all children's right to quality education under one system. There is a lot to unpack in the second system. I'll agree with Lamar Alexander here. Any school that accepts public funding is, without doubt, a public school. Question to both of you gentlemen. Would private schools be classified as public schools if this legislation passes?
Chairman Watt?
Absolutely not. And I'll be with Lamar Alexander tomorrow night and I'll ask him. But no, absolutely not.
Chairman Sapigi?
No.
Gentlemen, thank you for your response there, but I disagree with you.
Chairman Hurt, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I've just got a question, but first I wanted to refer to the data that was just referred to there a minute ago on the first year of the ESA programs. I don't think anybody's rooting against those students. I supported that legislation. I hope that those students do improve and we see improvement in year two. And I really hope we do, but I struggle with expanding a program on anticipation and not being able to see it. And so I did want to say that. But with that being said, I think it's on page 8 under annual report. The last sentence there refers to academic performance. Mm-hmm. Everybody see that? We good? What performance indicators will be used to measure to measure for the annual report if we're not going to do any testing? So kind of clarify to me how that's going to work, please.
Chairman Watt?
I believe you're on page 8, section B. That be correct where it says the department shall contract with a third party for the,
Right above that. Right above that.
sir.
I'm sorry, the last sentence right before that, the last sentence of section A, where it refers to an academic performance indicators for recipients enrolled in private school.
Mm-hmm. And your question again,
There's not. Sorry, there's not going to be any testing, so I'm wondering where those academic indicators will come from.
well, that is one of the things that we're working on is that there are tests, there are national norm tests, the ACT, the SAT that we take, and so your private schools offer those.
I do believe in section, or Chairman Sapigi?
Let me help you right there.
Mm.
What that section is, and then the sentence right after it is, there will be no requirements on the private schools to adhere to any kind of tests in the public side, remaining their autonomy and independence. What we are going to say is that if a private school decides to participate in this, eyes wide open, that student that comes from the public sector, from the public school, whatever testing and curriculum that they have at that,
You get a little bit closer to your
Sorry.
microphone.
I'm trying. That whatever curriculum and testing that is given by that private school on that student, that's where the next sentence comes in afterwards, that information will be disseminated without the identifying natures of those students, but in macro, third graders, fifth graders, whatever, who's taking advantage of this, will just be disseminated to a third party. That third party will be as the buffer between the government and the private schools to protect them. That information will therefore be sent to the Department of Education in macro with the unidentifying information on it of how those students are performing in their new environment, so that we can track them amongst their peers to make sure that they're performing as well as the ones that they're in peers of. And then that information would be disseminated back to us in macro without the identifying information.
And for members and for the millions, I'm sure that are watching streaming at home, this riveting discussion, it's in section 18 also would outline what Chairman Sapicki was just referencing there for anybody that wanted to read along or take a look at that. Who else do we have next on the list? Representative Ritchie, you are recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. And I'm not sure who anybody can end up answering it. When we end up looking at, it's there on page 8 under the prioritization of awards under section C. At the very end of that, if based off of the scholarships that are out there, if we're within 10% of the capacity level, that the following year there would be a 20% increase. I'm just curious where that 20. It's just a simple question. I don't know where the 20% came from versus a 10 or a 25 or something else.
Chairman Sapicki.
So, I'm sorry. We need to get extensions on these things here, man. They ain't coming out. So when you look at what other states have done in this, it spirals out of control, right? More people get into it, the costs go up. More people get into it, the costs go up. What we wanted to do is it gives us time to analyze the data as it comes in over time without growing it exponentially out of control. The 20% was in relationship to the 90%. So as the uptake hits 90%, we just stay 20% ahead of it to account for usage. We don't know what's going to happen when we put this out there, but what we want to make sure is it doesn't go from 20 to 90 to 200,000 and et cetera, and it busts our budget. So we put guidelines in there that this is going to be slow walked forward so that we can keep control of this financially.
And it is funded outside of TISA.
That's correct. And so the General Assembly, we have to make a direct appropriation on this every year. If the General Assembly says, look, we're not going to put any more than 140 million into this, it's 140 million and that's it.
Yeah, that part,
Representative Ritchie.
Thank you, Chair. That part, I completely understand that it's separated out. TISA, just for clarity on it, there's 20,000. If we're within 19% or 90%, that's going to end up getting us at 18,000. So is it 20% growth off of the 18 that we're at, or 20% off of the cap that it was at previously from the 20,000, then going to 24? Or
Chairman Sapicki.
It starts off the 20,000 as the cap, and the 20% will grow off the cap every year. That's good.
All right, Representative McKenzie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple things I've been listening to as we talk, and I'll talk to my homeschool person. The sponsor said twice, I bet it wasn't about homeschooling, but it may change. So I'll just encourage you to stay tuned. I think we need to stay tuned and make sure that everybody's interests are maintained as this bill winds its way through. And also, I heard the sponsor say a couple of times things we're working on. That bothers me. This bill should be mature enough. We said we're not going to even suspend it a week. So it must be mature. We're confident. If we can't suspend it or roll it 7 days, you have to be perfectly confident that it's in here, or you wouldn't argue that. So that concerns me. My first question is sports related. It sounds like there's a one-year prohibition on an athlete getting this $7,000. So my question is, if a prominent, high-performing private school with a really good football program sees a 7th grader who's a great athlete and built great and looks like he's going to be a super football player, if they recruit that person to their school, are you saying that they only have to sit out their 8th grade year and they'll be fully able to compete their 9th grade year?
Chairman Watt.
As I understand the bill, we talked to TSSAA. This bill falls under the same rules of TSSAA as any other school.
Representative McKenzie.
We're in virgin territory here.
No, we're not.
we're in virgin territory here in terms of a statewide public dollars going into this. So my question is, for that student that's been recruited to the prominent private school because of his or her athletic ability, are you saying as a seventh grader, they will only have to sit out their eighth grade year? And there's language in here, so I'm just dealing with the language. I'm not dealing with TSSAA. Per the language in this bill, are you saying that that student will only have to sit out his or her eighth grade year and be fully eligible to compete at that school that recruited them, their ninth grade
Yeah,
freshman year?
thank you. And we can get legal to address what is in the language of Representative Spicky, got my attention. He wanted to say something.
Chairman Sapiki, then if we
Thank
needed to,
you.
we'll go to legal.
There's a reflection in this bill as similar to the ESA bill that we passed a while back to make sure that this doesn't become a recruiting tool. So the reflection there is in guidelines with TSSAA rules is when a student transfers, they're usually ineligible athletically 365 days from their last day of competition. Representative, this is nothing new. It's already there. Plus Baylor, Macaulay, those big schools like that, they recruit all the time. So there's nothing new in the bill. All we wanted to make sure was that there were guidelines to prevent private schools from recruiting kids and having them play right away, which would create an unfair advantage. That's all.
Representative McKenzie?
So again, on that, you're right. Those big, rich schools are very financially endowed, so they can do that today. But we're talking about a whole different thing. And again, they're recruiting off of free dollars. This is the first time they're able to recruit with free dollars. So if they can match their $7,000 that the state's giving them to play football at their great institution, and give them $7,000 out of their foundation, then they're recruiting. This is dangerous. That part is dangerous, and I ask you all to reconsider not just going with the state, because TSSAA heretofore, except for a few students, has always been dealing kind of school versus school. The state is now getting involved and assisting, indirectly assisting that student. So I ask you all to consider that. My final line, I guess, for now, in terms of where we are on this, is this third-party data collection team. It's Representative talked about. So I'm trying to figure out what this data is going to look like. Okay, so you say we're working on getting rid of TCAP testing, and you didn't say this, but I'm thinking something more like a NAEP type testing, maybe, but a different kind of testing, not TCAP. You said earlier things that you're working on.
I'm going to go to Chairman White to address that because I don't believe that's in the bill. We'll get a clarification for that.
Well, thank you. What I was referring to in third through eighth grade, we're looking at going from from state standards to federal standards, which Representative Hasten referred to a while ago. And in the high school, eliminating some or many of the end of course tests is also. NAEP is not a test of end of course, or it's not. NAEP do you know what NAEP is? Mm-hmm. NAEP is a test that's given every two years to fourth and eighth graders in math and reading. And this is a standard. It's a sampling across thing. But there are, other tests that we could use, but no, not that.
Chairman Sapiki?
So in the proposal, we're going to go to the federal guidelines on the frequency of tests. In 3 through 8, we will still maintain the integrity of TCAP, but scale back what we do. What's going to be more revolutionary is in high school, where we're going to start to think outside the box of possibly going to the ACT and do away with some of our in the courses in high school. But to maintain the integrity in our schools and the continuity, is just maintain TCAP.
Representative McKenzie?
Thank you for that. So to the point, so we will have a TCAP type testing at our public schools, scaled down in number and frequency, but we'll have a TCAP standard. And at the private schools, we'll have something else. So my question is, this third-party vendor, what exactly are they going to do to give us an assurance that we are doing better at the private school with that voucher person as opposed to public schools with a similar ilk of a voucher person, same neighborhood, same school? So how is that going to look? What is that going to look like? Are they going to compare the two tests? Like they're going to, and again, this is just an analogy. Don't take this literal, but they're going to compare the ACT test to the SAT test, and they're going to say these are the measures of these two tests, so we're going to equate those two. Is that what's going to happen? And then, what type of entity? Is there any company out there doing this today?
Chairman Watt.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure there are. There's nothing in the bill that addresses that. Yeah, and I believe you're referring to page 8, section B, which it says, let's make sure read it so everybody's on the same page. The department shall contract with a third party for the third party to collect the data required in subsection A, was read a while ago, regarding parental satisfaction with the program and also the academic performance indicators for the recipients enrolled in the private school, and to report that data to the department for purposes of the report required in this section. That is a safeguard we're putting in place to make sure that we are evaluating what is going on with the data that is out there to make sure that this program is successful. This is simply a catch guard.
All right. Representative Warner.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, and Chairman White. Is this program, is this an entitlement?
Chairman Watt.
Great coaching.
Is it an entitlement?
Great.
Define your word for entitlement.
State benefit.
Mr. Chairman, could you please turn to page 9 and under 49-6-3509 payment state and local public benefit? Can you read, start with A and go to B there, read those first couple sentences and explain that to me, please?
49-6-3509.
Yes, sir, on page 9.
Yes, this is the section about how the payments are made. It says a scholarship awarded under this part must not be paid directly to the eligible student or eligible parent, is a state or local benefit for the purposes of eligibility in the Verification Entitlement Act. It's not taxable on income. So this just allows a parent, if Tennessee chooses to do such as this, to be able to take this ability.
So if you could, again, that Verification of Entitlements Act, explain that again to me.
We're going to have legal's probably going to be the best to explain this portion of the code. If we'll go out, if without objection, we will go out of session and hear from legal.
Casey Washburn, Office of Legal Services. Excuse me. The language that you're referencing is that a scholarship awarded under this part is a state or local public benefit for purposes of the Eligibility Verification for Entitlements Act, compiled in Title IV, Chapter 58. The Eligibility Verification for Entitlements Act is a short title reference given to the provision of code that requires every state governmental entity and local health department to verify that an applicant for a state or local public benefit is a United States citizen or lawfully present in the United States as provided in that chapter.
Representative Warner.
Question there for legal. So in your opinion, is this an entitlement or not?
I can't speak to what's considered an entitlement. I can only say that the language of the bill identifies this awarding of a scholarship to be a state or local public benefit, and that is a defined term for purposes of the Eligibility Verification for Entitlements Act, which is a short title given by the General Assembly in a prior General Assembly for that provision of law.
Question for legal? Oh, all right. No other questions for legal? We'll go back into session.
Sure.
Chairman Sapiki.
So to piggyback on that, and I'm if you look back on page 2, there's a reference back there under 2A that the recipient of this scholarship must be a United States citizen. Therefore, that puts protections in our schools on this program that illegals of this country cannot take advantage of this program.
Any other questions? Representative McKenzie? Sure.
So quickly, so in terms of the 45 to 60% increase on the teachers, statewide teachers insurance, is any of that money coming from the raises that we've gave? Because you had talked about there's already $250 million in the pipeline. Any of that money for that raise, for that benefit to the health insurance coming from teacher raises or salaries that we've promised in the past?
Chairman Sapigi?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, there is a portion of that. We sat around trying to address a lot of the complaints our teachers make, that when we give a pay raise, they never see it. It gets watered down and filtered down throughout the system. And when we give a 5% pay increase, it winds up being 1% by the time it gets to the district. The reason why we went from the 45 to the 60, because that benefits every teacher across the state in real dollars in their paycheck, because it's going to be a reduction either in their premiums or it'll be a reduction in what the counties are having to pay, which now they can turn that around and use it for real pay increases at the local level of recurring dollars that they now have control over. That part of the bill about health insurance is creating more local control across the state. Doesn't matter if you're urban, rural, or suburban. Every district across the state will benefit from this and be able to turn those savings around back to their teachers in real dollars in their pocketbook.
Representative McKenzie?
So to be clear, the answer is yes, that the money that we earmarked last year is that then told the teachers that it was for their raises. I don't disagree with it, the watering down, but that money will now go toward, or a portion of that money will now go toward their health insurance benefit.
Chairman Sapigi?
I think your statement was last year. No, that money's already been allocated and sent on pay. You mean the future year? And I believe there's still, and I think that's where we're working with finance right now to seeing still how much is available, and then have conversations as we move forward here, especially when we get the finance. Do we get more benefit for our teachers? Maybe trying to go from 60 to 62% or 63% and put more direct money into their pocket, because they're paying their insurance premiums out of their pocket right now. This is a way to return more cash benefit to the teachers.
Representative Warner?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple more questions, and I'll try to be quick, and I'll be done here. Chairman White, on page 5 of the bill, fees for transportation to and from private school in which the recipient is enrolled, paid to a fee for service transportation provider that meet the requirements established by the department. Can you explain that to me, or can I ask you some questions about that paragraph, that part of it?
Yeah, and if it's legal, I just refer to legal to give the specific, but go ahead. We'll work
Fees
on
for
it.
transportation. Can this money be used to purchase a vehicle?
No.
Chairman White? No.
Can it be used for Uber services?
Chairman White?
Well, yeah, what you're referring to is so the audience will know how the scholarship funds may be used. It doesn't go directly to the parent or to the student. And so this is how the things they can use it on: tuition fees, books, textbooks, computer hardware, things like that. But go ahead.
Yeah.
Representative Warner?
Yeah, and one other question. Could we go out of session and get the commissioner? I see she's in the room. Can we ask her some questions, please?
If it's the committee's will, we can. They're on the list. Without objection, we will go out of session.
This is her. This is her. Deborah, just go sit up there. You want to sit next to me? Good luck. Be
And
careful.
if you would just,
Watch your microphone.
both of you state your names and who you represent for the record.
Lizette Reynolds, Commissioner of Education.
Jack Powers, Assistant Commissioner of Policy and Legislative Affairs at the department.
Representative Warner, you got a question?
Yes, thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Commissioner, and thank you, Mr. Powers, for being here, and thank you for the job you do for the great state of Tennessee. First question, Commissioner, have you ever seen or overseen one of these programs in another state?
No, sir.
Representative Warner?
Currently, though, I guess, well, hold on. I do oversee the current ESA program.
Representative Warner?
But you have not seen a program like what's being proposed here?
I now manage the ESA program here in the state of Tennessee. Yes, sir.
And just typically, what's your thoughts on it?
It is a program that parents have chosen. There has been, through parent surveys, 99% of our parents are very satisfied with this program. When it comes to questions around their students' academic growth, 91% were either extremely or very satisfied with their child's academic growth. And so one of the things that we have to remember is that up to most of these children that are in these schools have not been in a public school prior to them entering into this school. So we're talking 53% right now, if you take into account the kids that were grandfathered under the program because it had been, it wasn't able to be implemented after it passed because of the court injunction. We're looking at about 71% of kids. So when we talk about some of these testing, oh, yes, sir.
So you, and I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was motioning the chairman there. I'm sorry.
Okay, I just want to make sure. So when we're talking about these testing numbers, the testing numbers are very, very low. And many of these students also are in non-tested grades. So we can give you that breakout at a later date. And so you can see the actual numbers.
So I may have misunderstood you or may have misheard you. So you said 53% of these students that are enrolled in the ESA program have never been to school?
I've never been in a public school.
Never been in a public
Public school, they've been kindergarteners. They were grandfathered under the program that had passed in 2019. They are new to the state of Tennessee.
So
Representative Warner?
So what, if there wasn't in the public, I mean, where did you're losing me there.
Okay, then how am I losing you? So 53% plus or minus the students currently using an ESA were not previously enrolled in a public school. 15.88% of students currently receiving an ESA are in kindergarten and therefore began their educational career with the ESA. 36.45% of students currently receiving the ESA were eligible based upon Public Chapter 171 legislative changes, and then 1.13% were new to the state of Tennessee. Okay.
Representative, if it would help, and Chairman, if you don't mind, I can add a little bit of clarity around that data that may be helpful. The original enrollment requirements for the ESA program specified that students who are eligible to enroll in kindergarten for the first time are eligible. So those students are some of the ones that we're citing there in that figure. Additionally, the public chapter that the commissioner mentioned, that was a bill that the legislature passed. And what it did is it said if you were a family or student that was eligible for the ESA program during one of the 3 years in which that program was not available because of the ongoing litigation, that you can now be eligible. And so we had some families that met those requirements that they would have been eligible back while the program was not an option, who are now participating. Those families may not have technically been enrolled in a Tennessee public school last year, but they were eligible, again, pursuant to that law that you all passed at the time when they couldn't take advantage of it. And so that's what constitutes both of those figures.
But they were enrolled in a public school somewhere. Now, I understand the kindergartens wasn't, but surely we don't have 53% of the people participating in the program that are kindergartners.
That's in what you just said is correct. So they would have had to have been enrolled at one point in time in a Tennessee public school, or they would have had to be eligible to enroll in kindergarten for the first time.
Thank you for clearing that up.
You're welcome.
Next question, the new program, Commissioner, your thoughts on how it's going to work? Just can you give me a general concept of how you see this thing in 5 years? How many students? What it's going to cost the state? Say 5 years down the road. Then I have one last follow up, and I promise, Chairman, I'm done.
As the chairman both stated before, this is subject to appropriations. There are some controls in the bill per the trigger that you have to meet 90% of the enrollment. So it's all to be determined as students get to know of this program.
Representative Warner.
Okay, I'm going to read a little statement here. Then I have a question at the end, and I promise, Chairman, I'm done. As a fiscal conservative, our taxpayers deserve to know how their tax dollars are being spent. And schools that accept voucher students should be held to the same standard as public schools. Do you agree with that statement?
Sir, private schools right now test frequently. They administer what we call norm reference test. And so they also have very rigorous testing protocols and requirements. And at the end of the day, they are accountable to their families to whether or not their students are achieving.
One last follow up.
Yeah, you might not have got it there. I think that was a yes or no answer. Do you agree that they should be held to the same standards?
They are held to the same standards in the sense that these schools are also responsible to their families to ensure that the academic growth of their children continue. Otherwise, they can walk away from the program. And if enough families are not satisfied with the program, the school can go out of business.
Yeah, and I get that.
What Representative? I'm going to go to Representative McKenzie, and then we'll come back to you if you need to. That was getting to be into a little bit of a bonus round there. So Representative McKenzie, and then we'll come back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here today. Do you oppose or support this version that we're talking about today? It's significantly different than the governor's. So this version that we just amended, 14448, do you support this version of the voucher program?
I am very encouraged by the spirit of this bill and the fact that it does include provisions that are going to allow our families to have choices. And this is a large bill. We have been going over it, and we will provide more information as we get through the process.
Representative McKenzie.
That was not an answer. I'm serious. I'm not being flip or anything, but I'm pretty direct, as I think you know.
Yes, sir.
Do you support? You've had it as long as I've had it.
Sure.
Okay, if not longer. Do you support this version of the voucher bill that Representative Sapicki and White have before us today?
I support the bill, but we also support the right to be able to also work with the sponsors to make sure that we get the language correct with all the provisions that are in here.
Representative McKenzie.
So in earlier testimony, you testified that the testing results were nothing to write home
Sir,
about.
yes, sir.
That's your statement, not mine. In terms of you got to that statement based on informed decisions and looking at numbers. What about what has changed? I get parents like it. Two quick questions, then I got one follow-up. What has changed in your opinion about the old results? And then I'll ask then if in 5 years, 7 years, there's still nothing to write home about, would you support rescinding this piece of legislation?
So I really appreciate you giving me that opportunity to clarify that statement. So once we dug into this, one of the things that we have to remember again, private schools administer tests. They administer tests frequently, and they administer tests for their parents to know their academic achievement. What that means is the curriculum that they have is separate from the curriculum that we have in our state, because our public schools must adhere to the Tennessee state standard. Private schools have their own curricula and their own scope and sequence. And while many of the curricula is similar, it isn't necessarily in the same scope and sequence as the way that our public schools teach these, because they have to teach to our Tennessee state standards. which are at grade level. So we call those standards and the test that by which the test is taken against them, the criterion reference test, which is what the TCAP is, because it's against a criteria or a standard. Many of these private schools, they use norm reference tests like the Iowa Basic Tests and Skills, the ERB, the Stanford 9. So there's no real comparable amongst the private schools themselves because they have their own curriculum. These students then test against at the end of the year, much like our students, to see whether or not they have actually learned the curriculum that was delivered to them.
Representative McKenzie, a follow-up, and then we'll go to a couple on the list.
So what, from your experience as an educator, how would steering taxpayer dollars to private schools benefit students? You're over the Tennessee Department of Education.
Yes, sir.
Please elaborate how steering dollars away from public schools to private schools benefit our students.
It benefits students because students who aren't achieving and who are not happy or their parents are not happy and not flourishing in their public schools should have an opportunity to get an education elsewhere, and that's what this bill is about.
All right, Representative Warner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you again, Commissioner. You kept making a comment and you was going back to, and I lost the train of thought or lost exactly how you were phrasing the comment. You were saying that students in private schools basically or parents had the choice if those schools wasn't performing that they could remove them. Can you rephrase? Because I don't want to speak for you.
I mean, private schools are directly accountable to their parents. If those parents are not happy with the education that their student is receiving, they can walk away, whether they walk away with their own dollars or if this program passes, they walk away with these dollars. At the end of the day, if the private schools aren't doing their job, they go out of business.
Thank you. And I have one last thing here.
Representative Warner, go ahead.
Read to you and get your thoughts on it. And in the 1981 decision, Plyer versus Doe, the Supreme Court held that illegal alien children are entitled to a free public education as a matter of equal protection. As a result of public schools, public schools stop asking about students' immigration status and begin treating all children exactly the same in the U.S. Vouchers use taxpayer funds, and the Plyer holding discourages school systems from asking students who are here illegally. Is the state going to ask students whether they're here illegally or not?
Sir, as Chairman Supicki testified earlier, there is language in here about the public benefit. And I'm not a lawyer and I'm not going to pretend to be one. So I would appreciate the ability to defer this to the legal.
Yeah, again, you're dodging my question. My question is, it's not really a legal question. My question is whether the state is going to find out if these children are illegals or not that we're going to fund.
It's my understanding that there is a Social Security requirement in here. So if the student has a Social Security number, then they are legal to be educated in this country.
Can you point that out in the bill where that's to me?
Representative Warner, let's wait to be recognized. You have, go ahead, follow up, and then I'm going to go to the next person on the list.
Yes, Commissioner, can you please point that out in the bill where it states that?
Yes, it's page 2, section 49-6-3502. Eligible student means a resident in the state who is a United States citizen.
Again, I get that. The bill says that. But my question is the state going to ask the question? You run the Department of Education. Is the state going to ask the question, are these children illegals or not?
They are eligible in this bill if they are a United States citizen.
Thank you.
And I will just add, we had, Senator Lamar Alexander mentioned earlier, did want to share that in 2014, he did propose $11,2,100 scholarship for kids that would redirect $24 billion of federal funding for states to expand school choice. Chairman Hurt, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank Commissioner for being here and answering questions. just wanted to get your thoughts on something. I'm in initial conversations with, about some of the testing, and you referred to rigorous testing that the private school use and pertaining to some curriculum that they use. Again, this is all come upon us real fast. So as I've gotten this information, I plan to get more as we move forward. But I've been told that, and again, this is not confirmed, but I'm just trying to throw this out there, that some of the curriculum that some of these schools use is good curriculum, but the testing that they refer to, literally the high school testing, say for example, math is at a 6th or 7th grade level. So when I hear that, I'm thinking that there are some, the curriculum's good, but as they're tested at a lower standard, so the scores look better. That's the first thing that comes to my mind. Again, I'm in initial conversations to kind of get more information on this to know what we're looking at. So as we move forward, if we're finding that, are you still okay with those being the measures that we're measuring these schools by?
Those would be reflective on the ACT.
Chairman Hurt, follow up. All right. Representative McKenzie.
Thank you. Isn't it true that the version that you all created through the governor's office and your staff had 0 measures of accountability in terms of what those students were doing?
Yes, sir.
So why now? I guess I'll ask. I mean, you all have worked on this since you showed up here in Tennessee. You've been working on that, and I'm confident that that's been your number one priority. Is this the governor's number one priority? That the governor's number one priority. So, in all of this exhaustive measures that got you all to your bill, you had 0 accountability measures. So, but now you're championing accountability measures. 2 questions. Why the change? And there is a change. And secondly, as you talked about the private school norms, and I'll bring it back, you were in the audience, how are we going to compare the ACT to the SAT? You got a third-party vendor. As you talked about the private schools testing compared to the TCAP testing, how are you going to do that third party, and how are you going to measure that, and what is that third party going to do? So why the change, and what is this third party going to do? And are there companies out there doing that?
And Representative McKenzie, I do want to note for the committee that we do have representatives from the governor's office here as well. They may be more appropriate, respectfully, sir, to speak to differences in philosophy in the governor's proposal. I just wanted to note that for the committee.
But I'll tell you from my perspective, when this bill came out, for me, the first layer of accountability does rest with the parent. So again, as I mentioned to Representative Warner, parents can leave if they don't see that their students are achieving in the manner that which they are able to achieve. So that is, for me, that was enough accountability. Now, there have, as is the prerogative of the General Assembly, there have been some ideas to be able to bolster that up. And so the way that this bill does it is, again, when they talk about a third party, what we're talking about is, again, we're going to be talking about a variety of tests all across these, all across the providers that choose to participate in the program. Not all providers are going to choose to participate in this program, but the ones that do, we have asked, or this bill asks, to be able to provide that data. They will have comparable data. I have seen the ERB before, where you can see where your student is amongst the other students. And so there is the ability by a third-party research organization or someone that we find to be able to compile this information as reported to the department, and then be able to give us the information to tell us, are students achieving or are they not?
Representative Slater.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here, Commissioner. A couple of questions along the lines of test. That's been the topic here for the past few minutes.
Yes, sir.
Is the ACT a valid and reliable test?
Yes, sir.
Is the Iowa Test of Basic Skills a valid and reliable test?
Yes, sir.
Is the Stanford 9 a valid and reliable test?
Yes, sir.
Is the ERB a valid and reliable test?
Yes, sir.
When private schools administer these tests, are those results valid and reliable?
Yes, for the students, yes, and for the families.
And under this current legislation, any student who accepts the Freedom Scholarship and then takes that with them to a private school who has agreed to accept eligible students, those students who attend that private school with this Freedom Scholarship would be required to take one of these valid and reliable tests. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And those results then would be submitted to the Department of Education for a report that then could be submitted to the legislature. Is that correct?
So we would prefer, and I believe this bill has it, that it would go through to a third-party evaluator, again, to keep the government out of the information. So it would go to a third-party evaluator, and this third-party evaluator then report back to us and back to the General Assembly as to whether or not students are achieving in the program.
And so that layer of protection would also lend itself, would it not, to making sure that private schools maintain their autonomy and continue to be private schools.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Warner?
Thank you again, Chairman. I promise this is the last time. Commissioner, you keep reference parents have the right, especially in the private schools. What's your thoughts when parents get in our public schools when really, I guess the only chance, I'm sure they can go speak to the teacher, they can go speak to the principal, but when they go to the school board meetings and they only get 3 minutes to speak, what's your thoughts on that? And when the FBI starts rating these people that have spoke at these school board meetings because they have concerns, whether it be a pride flag, whether it be anything going on at the school.
Representative Warner, I want to allow the commissioner to have a chance to talk about it if she would, but it's really getting off the bill here on this specific issue. But if you have a question about the bill or if she would like to reply to that, that's fine. But I don't think that we need to expect our guests to be able to answer to the school board hypothetical.
Yeah, well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate what the commissioner's saying there. I just wish that at our school board meetings, the parents got as much right as she's talked about today for the public schools. That's all I was kind of the point I was trying to make. But thank you again, Commissioner, for being here. Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion. We go back in session.
I did have one. If you do you withdraw that motion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'll withdraw that motion.
Thank you. Representative Ritchie, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Commissioner, for being here. Over the past 3 weeks, had multiple conversations with folks from your department that have come in on other bills that are coming through K-12 committee. And some of those conversations is, hey, this is something similar that could be in the governor's bill that's coming up. We would prefer that this end up getting deferred until later on. So now that we're here, kind of taking up this bill, and I'm not going to reference it as the governor's bill anymore. And the reason for that is it's in the General Assembly and it's the legislator's bill at this point. But my concern is there's 3 versions of this bill going through right now. So from the Department of Education, since I've been shared to kind of hold off on making a decision or trying to look at some of the other legislation so we could take this up, which one of these 3 bills does the Department of Education prefer?
Representative, I just want to chime in there if you don't mind, since I've been the one coming around and talking to you about all of those other bills. And you're exactly right. I mean, we've seen a couple of pieces of legislation from your colleagues that have addressed the assessment piece or the data reporting piece. And I think all that we've tried to say is that we know that that is going to be a topic for rich discussion. I think a couple of your colleagues have mentioned 7 weeks and the fact that we'll continue to debate these topics. We're really excited that all 3 of them echo the choice component, the spirit of the governor's proposal to give Tennessee families choice.
Representative McKenzie, final questions?
Yeah, final question. What I'll say is nothing in any of these bills, the governor's, yours, the Representative White and Sapicki et al. Says anything about the conversation that you and Representative Slater had about these testing. There's nothing in these bills that say that they have to take the ERB, the Iowa test. Nothing says that explicitly. We're not compelling these students to take this test. Am I correct or am I incorrect? And please show me where we're compelling, at least especially in your bill, and in the original language, that we're compelling these people to take these specific tests.
Sure. So under the State Board of Education, each of the categories are required, have requirements under them. So under category 1, which is the state approved, that test, they must be test in ELA and math grades 3 through 11. With respect to category 2, and they, again, as part of their accrediting agency, they must also administer national achievement tests annually in the areas of ELA and math for grades 3 through 11. Again, for category 3, once again, through the through their accreditation, they must administer national standardized achievement tests annually in areas of ELA and math for grades 3 through 11. In category 4, they must meet the standards of their accrediting organization. And again, there was an ample discussion earlier about these church-related umbrella schools. And so at the end of the day, we know that those schools are not included in this. And in category 5, it is also, the category 5 is also administer a national standardized achievement test annually in areas ELA and math for grades 3 through 11.
But again, 4 and 5 are not on the list. The only ones on the list on the Tennessee State Board policy are 1, 2, and 3.
No, also category, yes, they have all these categories. They have category 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and independent homeschools.
Representative McKenzie.
Those are state board
Again,
regulations.
as I look at this, categories 4 and 5 just does not specifically call out the list that you and Representative Slater had a conversation about. So, and I'm looking at your January 24 Department of Education non-public school category descriptions.
Sir, and that is probably in reference to our current ESA program, which only applies to categories 1, 2, and 3.
All right, members, any other questions for our guests? All right. Without objection, thank y'all. Without objection, we'll go back into session and we'll go back to Chairman Watt.
Thank you. Appreciate our guest and appreciate all the questions moving forward. Chairman, if I may just take a couple minutes.
Sure.
We didn't get to point out some of the positives of the bill that we have put in here. One of the things that we're doing is we're increasing from 5 to 6% the weight for a student that lives in a sparse district. We're adding $75 per student in any school for maintenance allocation. So for example, you have a 10,000 students, that's $750,000 additional. Increases from 5 to 8% the weight for a student in a small district. We've already talked about the insurance from 45 to 60%. We've already talked about flexibility in testing. We're also doing flexibility in teacher evaluations. A lot of times we put the same requirements on a teacher that's a high performer as one that is not. And so we're doing more flexibility for the teachers. For example, is significantly above expectations in their evaluation, not sooner than 3 years, above expectations, not sooner than 2 years, and expectations not sooner than 1 year, and it's below, of course, every year. There's been a lot said about RTI, response to intervention. This allows the LEAs to use high dosage, low ratio tutoring to satisfy the intervention of RTI requirements. We've also included here a lot of people concerned about the 4th grade retention. We've got that addressed in here to eliminate that. Practitioner and professional license go from 5 to 8 years for the renewal cycle. We're also put in here where we're going to give the district the flexibility to have an hour-based alternative. What that does is gives the State Board of Education the authority to promulgate rules to allow LEAs and public charter schools to choose between a day-based system or the equivalent hour-based system. We've addressed that in the past. We are going to, in this bill, we'll dissolve the Achievement School District. That's the talk is for many years. And then We also put in here addressing chronic absenteeism. Many of our schools says you're dinging us for students that have chronic absenteeism when they have diseases and illness where they cannot be at school for periods of time. This will still have accountability, but they will not be dinged for those students that are chronically absent. Career readiness assessments, those are among a few of the things that we've also put in here to give flexibility to our schools where they can make decisions themselves, especially for our higher performing schools.
Thank you, Chairman Watt. Members, any questions for our sponsors? Seeing none, we are set to vote on House Bill 1183. Madam Clerk, please take the vote.
Representative Balso. Votes aye. Representative McKenzie.
No.
Votes no. Representative Ritchie.
Present.
Present not voting. Representative Slater.
Aye.
Votes aye. Representative Stevens. Votes aye. Representative Warner.
No.
Votes no. Chairman Hurt.
Present.
Present not voting. Chairman White.
Aye.
Votes aye. Chairman Haston.
Aye.
Votes aye. Speaker Pro Tem Marsh.
Aye.
Votes aye.
Bill passes on to full education. Members, item number 2 has been taken off notice. We will roll the remainder of the calendar to next week's calendar. And without objection, we stand adjourned.